Muy buenas tardes, bienvenidos, bienvenidas. Vamos a empezar. I'm very excited to welcome everybody to our first speaker series for this year. Before introducing Roberto, I wanted to just mention a few things. We have a number of speakers in May 2022 coming up, very exciting talks. We're going to try some in English and some in Spanish this year. Last time we did them all in Spanish, but just to see kind of reaching different audiences. So I know that Diego Gil from Chile will present in English, as will Fernanda Janberry on June 1st. But the other two talks by Alejandro Trejo from the COMEX and Jorge Montejanos Camilla and Laura Janca from Centro Geo. We're talking about making the plan, their experience making the plan Ordenamiento Territorial for Mexico City. Will be in Spanish and should be very interesting. We're recording this talk. You can find our other talks from last year on our our YouTube channel. I put the link in the chat. If you could subscribe to the YouTube channel, we need 10 more subscribers, and then we get a URL that is not just random numbers and letters. We get the real URL. We get official with 100 subscribers. So if you don't mind, that'd be great. No pressure. So Dr. Roberto Ponce López. Roberto, I've always wanted to ask you, are you related to Fernando Garcia Ponce?
Not
Maybe.
to the best of my knowledge.
Okay, you should just say you are. Great artist.
Okay.
Ruptura. Dr. Roberto Ponce López, a professor at the Tec de Monterrey for a number of years and has a fascinating background in GIS and spatial analysis, including a PhD from UCLA's main competition, the Urban Studies and Planning Department at MIT. He also has degrees from Carnegie Mellon and ITAM. And you worked with the Singapore MIT research team. Did you live in Singapore while you were doing that? Or just...
Yes, I spent like 6 months living in Singapore.
Nice, cool. Great, and so, he works on spatial analysis and GIS and has published a number of papers and has various cool projects on topics related to urban morphology and these new space-time methods of urban analysis, kind of tracking how people move within cities and on economic segregation within cities. You can see, you'll hear about it today. I can put a link to a cool website he's made about urban expansion in Monterrey that has made me have to reconsider some of my previous work on changes in density in Mexico, which is exciting. So without further ado, we can maybe discuss some of that after your talk, but I'll give you the floor, and everybody, if we can, a warm Zoom round of applause to welcome Dr. Ponce.
Well, thank you so much for the introduction. Thanks for having me today here. I'm going to present about a project called a Metropolitan Urban Information System for Monterrey. Thanks for posting the website. That address, the Expansión Urbana MX is the current and old website. We've been working in a new version of it with the findings that we have encountered in the past 2 years. And let me share another link with you. This other link is still the version that we have in GitLab. But in a few months, or perhaps in a few weeks, we're going to replace this old version in the domain of Expansión Urbana MX with this new version of the website. And that's what I'm going to present to you today. Let me share my screen. Just one sec. Okay. Oops. Okay, yes, so I'm presenting here on behalf of my team. I have the fortune of having like a growing team of researchers and research assistants. We have two postdoctoral affiliates, 4 professors also participating in this study, and we have like around 15 or 20 students involved. Most of them are undergrads. And this project has been funded by the FEMSA Foundation. No? It's a 3-year project. So we have so many things and a lot of analysis that I'm going to try to make a brief presentation of it. Let me just give you the context of Monterrey. This is a city located in the north of Mexico, in the northeastern part. It's like it's the industrial hub of the country, and the population is about 5.5 million of inhabitants. Here in this picture, we have the morphology of the city in 1960 and then in 2020. Monterrey in the 1960s was a very monocentric city. All of the jobs were located in the central area. That was the size of the contours that we have is the size of the city at the time, right? Monterrey in 2020 has grown a lot. So the two maps are in the same scale. And now what we have today is a very polycentric city, right? We have like the emergence of some corridors with a high density of jobs, and also new centralities that have emerged in the outskirts of the city. So we have only the data of the last 30 years about population and urban growth, but from 1990 to 2020, the population grew by 2.75 times, while the urbanized area increased by 3.7 times, right? So what we have is that the urbanized area, our consumption or land, is increasing faster than the population growth. And in consequence, the city has lost about 40% of density in this period of 30 years. This is problematic. This is a problem for I mean, you are more experts than I also in all the consequences of urban sprawl, you know, for the environment, for travel behavior, etc., but also for public finance, right? This means that the government should care of a territory that is 3.7 times bigger with 2.7 times more resources, right? So this is kind of also unsustainable for the public finances. So this is the context of the city. And in this context, we start working in this urban information system. It's a platform. This is the website, the link that I just shared with you in the chat. Our ambition is that this platform can document and serve as a trigger to start a discussion between citizens and also authorities about the future that we have for Monterrey and the future that we want. What is the aspiration and what is the vision that we should have for Monterrey? What we encounter in Monterrey is that there's no vision of future, or actually there is a vision of future, but it's not defined neither by the authorities nor by the citizens. It's actually the private developers who have the largest influence in defining what's the future of the city. So we want a city that sprawls. We want a more compact city, and what's the type of city that we want to live. And once we define this vision, we need to select the instruments that approach us to that vision that we pick. So I think that technology is and this type of web platforms is an habilitator to try to come up with data and some evidence that documents the dire consequences of the pattern of development of urban development that we have followed in the past 30 years in Monterrey. So this is some example that what's been happening in Monterrey. This is the urban sprawl of the city, but the problem is not only the sprawl of the city. The problem is also the change in the urban morphology of the city. What we have here is an exercise. It's two ways of seeing the same thing. On the left-hand side, we have this exercise of drawing different concentric circles separated by 1 kilometer, each one. And then we compute the population by block in 2000, and then after in 2020. And then we get the difference. What's the difference of population between 2020 and then in 2000? And what we have here is all the areas that are in red, all the circles that are in red have lost population. And the population growth has occurred mainly in the blue areas that we have in the map. So what's happening is that we have like a huge and a big change in the demographics of the city. So the youths and in general, the population, there's a trend of migration from the central area to the periphery of the city. This is a problem because what we have here in the map is we have added the subway lines, the 3 subway lines that we have in the city. And what's happening is that we're losing population in the areas that are best served by transportation and by services. We don't have services, we don't have public transit. You can see in the map in all the blue areas that we have there. That's the exercise in the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, what we have is the HEPS. A HEPS is the equivalent to the census tracts in the US. And we've done the same exercise of matching the HEPS or the tracts between the census of 1990 and the 2020 census. All the red areas lost population. All the blue areas gain population. This is big. You can. I mean, let me change my. Okay, here in the Zoom, actually you can navigate through the web page, and in Problematica, we have these maps that I just showed you. We intend that all the maps are interactive. Accessible to citizens and also to policymakers. You can show just total population. You can switch to the density of the youth population, or density of jobs, or density of housing. Or the same exercise with the HEPS. For instance, this is cool. This is cool. I like this one. To show this one. So you can select between total population, elder population than 65, and youngest than 19 years old, right? So you can see, let me stick with total population. What we have here in the first checkbox, this is to select only the HEPS that were already present in the census of the 1990. So what we have here is what the city looked like in 1990. We can add the HEPS from the census of 2000. So these are the HEPS. The HEPS that are colored by this checkbox are only the HEPS that show for the first time in the census of the 2000, right? But we're not even before. So this is the city that this is like another way to say it's like the development that was added in 2000 and was not present in the 1990. And then we have it for the census of 2010. And then these are the HEPS that showed for the first time in the 2020 census. So you can see all of them together. And what we have here is the same exercise. Everything that is in red has lost population. Everything in blue has one population. But what is striking is that we just move further and further. Look at this. A HEPS development that we started in 2020, we have some HEPS that lost population in 2020 already. And this is even more striking. New development, new colonialized area, new urbanized area that show up for the first time in the 2010 census has already lost population 10 years after. So it's striking. It's like a nonsense in how we're growing. It's just like we're migrating to the suburbs and migrating to the periphery of the city, but even areas that we just built 20 or 10 years ago, instead of densifying those areas and focusing in trying to come up with subcenters and some social infrastructure there in order to densify what we have, we abandon these areas and move even further away. Look for the population of 65 and older. This is even more striking, right? So in general, the population we're losing. We have lost the el bono demográfico, the demographic bonus. No, all the population it's been in general increasing the population of 65 and plus. And for youth, look at this. It's even more striking than the for total population. more striking this migration to the suburbs. I like this variable of population younger than 19 or 15 years old, because it's a good approximate of the new households, of the new household formation. I mean, it's an approximate for new households that have kids, of course. But what you can see is how this pattern is even more severe for this group of population. Why? What this means? This means that new households practically are forced to migrate to the suburbs, because in those areas is where they find the housing unit that fits to their needs and to their budget. And this is related to the cost of lands, right? Housing in the central area of Monterrey, that is losing a lot of population, it's very expensive. It's above, you cannot find anything cheaper than 3 million pesos. And the housing that is affordable, you can find it only in the suburbs, right? In practice, any Infonavit housing units, there's no Infonavit housing units that are currently built in the central area of the city because of the cost of land. All these type of housing units are just sent to the outskirts, to municipalities like Garcia, for instance, or to municipalities like General Escobedo, Suazo, over here. And this is also related to how we regulate zoning and land use. For instance, this municipality, San Nicolás de los Garza, has been losing population for the past 20 years. The kids who grow up in San Nicolás de los Garza now have their own families. They have to move to General Escobedo or to Suazo because they cannot afford to live in San Nicolás de los Garza. And San Nicolás de los Garza has a very restrictive regulation of the land use. You cannot build taller than 14 meters height, for instance. So this is, let me go back to my presentation. Okay. So this one example. These two images are very, I mean, this is not rocket science. It's just like visualization, some GIS, and some processing of the data from the census. But this has a very powerful impacts every time we show this to policymakers and to mayors of the cities and to directors of urban development. This is a very powerful image. This is another way to try to use, I mean, what we intend with our information system is to make use of technology and these platforms of visualization in order to encourage some change in the policies. And this is striking. I mean, you cannot more than agree with this analysis and try to come up with some change. This is something that we aspire with this platform that I'm showing you. So I included this slide because I mean, many of you I see are from Mexico and also have worked and lived in Mexico. But I always make this distinction between urban science and smart cities. I lived a number of years in the US and I studied urban studies and planning at MIT. And as many of you, we have like a perhaps very critical point of view or very critical perspective to smart cities, right? And this use of technology. After 4 years being in Mexico, I encounter in my meetings with government officials and businesses and like that, always this concept of smart cities. In trying to, I'm not going to tell names, but I've been in many meetings that when I present some of my data and whatever I have, and they say, okay, but we have smart cities. We're going to fix the problem in the cities with technology. This is like a very spread thought that I find in policymakers and also with business. And what I come up is, okay, but smart cities is focused on the short-term efficiency, in the efficiency of the city, having smart lighting, smart grid. Okay, this is interesting and it's important, but that focus on the short-term efficiency, right? What is urban science about? Urban science is how to use data, visualization, modeling, and some simulations, but to focus on the long-term decisions, and the planning decisions about the future, how we come up with our policies and our infrastructure in order to have the right instruments that take us to our vision of future that we want for our city. And this is what we try to do with this urban information system, right? We aspire to do this type of urban science in using some data, some modeling, to come up with to try to change things how they're done here. This project in the first year in 2019 focused on the economic cost of urban sprawl. Actually, Ivan is here. Ivan was a former student of mine in the master's program, and also has a leading career in governments, and it's an expert in the cost of infrastructure. It's an expert on highways and asphalts and all of that. So we were very interested in the cost of economic sprawl. Calculating the cost of economic sprawl is super hard. There's a rich literature on that, but it's very hard to calculate because there are so many costs involved in this, right? We have the cost of maintenance, we have the cost of highways, the cost of lighting, the cost of public safety, the cost of etc., right? Many costs involved. So we focus only on one. What's the cost of maintenance and replacements of streets and roads? We come up with these diagrams with Ivan help to define what's the structure of roads, or primary roads and secondary roads in the city. And we conducted 25 in-depth interviews with public officials to come up with, first, what's the type of structure and the type of maintenance that we have for each one of these infrastructures. What's the most common type of renovation that is done, and how frequent this renovation needs to happen. We validated these results with 2 private developers, of the largest developers in the state. And we conducted like a second validation of our findings with contrasting the findings with the public expenditure data that is available in INEGI. There was a lot of GIS stuff here because in Mexico for streets, we only have the lines, but you don't have like the width of the roads, right? The width of the roads. And so we needed to sign an agreement with Catastro, with the Cadastral Information Office of the state. And they share with us all the planimetry for the city. And from the planimetry and a routine in Python, we were able to come up with the width lengths of the roads. And through that process, we were able to compute like the surface area and done it by type of roads. So we did this for primary roads, for secondary roads, and for tertiary roads. This is kind of our table that makes a summary of all of this. We computed the surface area by municipality. And we computed like the percentage of urbanized area that belongs to roads in the city and by municipality. So around 25% of the surface in the metropolitan area are highways and streets, roads. After that analysis, we kind of done the same thing with green space. But in this case, we use satellite imagery to design an index, an already well-established index in the literature of remote sensing, to identify, tag and identify and classify green space in the city. And we computed also the surface area for green space, right? And we found large dissimilarities according by the income level that is predominant in each one of these municipalities. So for instance, San Pedro, which is like one of them, perhaps is the most affluent municipality in all Latin America. In San Pedro, you have like a dotation of 9 square meters per inhabitants of green space, while in other municipalities in this periphery that has grown in the past 10, 20 years, only have like a dotation of 3 square meters per person, right? And we don't get even to the quality of the public space. That also has like a huge variation between municipalities. So there's a huge disproportion in the access to green space according to the socioeconomic status found in each municipality. And so these findings, we took them to our platform. Let me share my screen again. So in the old website, we have all this, think of costs, how we calculate costs, we define all this methodology. And in the new website, in the new digital platform, we summarize it like this, right? So we have here like the surface area dedicated to roads versus the surface area dedicated to green space by each one of the municipalities. That's this illustration that we have here. And on the right hand side, we have we were able to compute the surface area of roads by the shape, cut it like a cookie cutter, cut by the shape of the urbanized area at that time in that year. So unfortunately, we didn't have information about streets going back to the present. We only have like the planimetry for 2019, but we have the size of the city, the contours at the different moments. And these contours were calculated based on remote sensing information using the satellite imagery. So we did this of having the streets, the current streets, but cutting the shape of the streets by the contour of the surface area of the urbanized area in each one of these years, starting from 1990. And what we have here is, look at this. We have these are the primary roads in this pale blue. These are primary roads. So you see some increase in primary roads, that's fine. You see this increase that is bigger in the secondary roads, but look at this. This is the increase in tertiary roads. These are local streets. So all this residential development in the outskirts of the city, this is how it looks like. Look at the surface area of roads, how has increased exponentially after the year of 2000. It's huge. It's a huge increase. And the case that we make is that, okay, but this is going to be very, very problematic for the public finances. So we conducted this calculator is still available in the old website. We're going to replace it in the new one. But what we show is different scenarios where we can change you can change the scenario of replacement of the roads. So how often, for instance, this one, how often primary roads should be replaced? The default is every 5 years, secondary roads every 15 years, and tertiary roads or local roads every 50 years. So you can move these parameters and it's gonna recompute for you the cost of maintenance for the whole city, Monterrey. What we found is that under this scenario, about 15% needs to be dedicated now just to the cost of repaving the roads every 5 years for primaries, every 15 years for secondary, and every 50 years to tertiary roads. But again, going back to the other image that I showed you, that shows this exponentially increasing trends in local roads caused primarily by the urbanization in the outskirts of Monterrey, it's going to be a problem in 20 years, in 30 years. So these streets that you built in 2000 and 2020 are local streets that will require maintenance, major maintenance after 30 years, 40 years, perhaps 50 years of usage. And this is going to be a huge problem for the municipalities after 2040. Starting in 2030, 2040, and in 2050, it's going to have a huge problem. There's no public finance, public budget that can sustain this type of development. And another thing that we start working is economic segregation, residential economic segregation. This is a picture that we took with a drone in one of the areas in Monterrey that shows the largest residential segregation in the city. So you can see how this house, we have a swimming pool over here. Look at the wall, how it is walled over here, and then the sharp difference with their neighbors, right? Look at how this road splits the income level in these two populations that share the same urban space. So the problem with studying segregation in Mexico is that income data is not available as it is in the US Census. There's a huge area of research in segregation in the United States. Many indexes have been proposed and tested over the past 70 years. And they're made to work with the US Census data. The problem in Mexico is that we don't have the data as it comes in the US Census. How it comes in the US Census, you have these brackets of income, 3 or 4 different brackets. You have the population that falls within each bracket by census tract. And the indexes assume that the data is in that format, and then you use it to compute. In Mexico, it's very hard. For instance, Pavo has published one paper that is kind of a cult paper because it's the only serious effort that has done in Mexico to compute segregation as it is done in other parts of the world. What we have in Mexico is we have income data, but it's reported in a national survey. It's a survey, it's the Encuesta Nacional de Ingreso y Gasto en los Hogares. It's a survey that is conducted every 2 years. The problem with this survey is that the resolution is, the statistical representativeness of the survey is by state. You cannot go deeper, you cannot go to census tracts or AHEPs, which is what we needed, this information available at that level. On the other hand, we have the census data. We have all this information reported by census tract or AHEP, all the demographics, but not income. Income after the census of 2000, income is only collected through the long questionnaire in the census, and the long questionnaire has a statistical representativity of municipalities, but not by census tract. So it's a problem. How can we measure urban segregation? We have this type of data split that way. So we make use of microsimulation. A team of researchers, maybe some of them are connected, I don't know, Juan Antonio, Fernanda, Gonzalo, have been working on this. In microsimulation, this is a special microsimulation is a technique widely used in agent-based modeling to produce a synthetic population. This synthetic population is a finely detailed population disaggregated at the minimum statistical units of analysis. So this method combines individual level data as the census, as the survey, the income survey, with geographical aggregated data, which is the census. And through this model, through this exercise, through this technique, we are able to combine the two things and produce a reliable enough population that has income and also a geographical tag, which is the census tract or a HEP where this person lives. So this is the method, how it is done. We have this numerical procedure. It's deterministic. If you repeat it, you'll get the same result. And the intuition behind the procedure is that you have some marginal probabilities in the individual level table and also in the census. And these marginal probabilities refer to how this data is aggregated in the areal units. In other words, we have common data related to income. For instance, common data in the two sources of information. For instance, we know that access to private health, having internet at home, and educational level. These three variables, for instance, are highly related to income. And these three variables are available at both sources. These three variables are available in the census data and also in the individual level survey. What we do is we clone these individuals and assign them to different areal units in order that the marginal probabilities of the newly aggregated data match with the original marginals in the census data found. So it's a cloning procedure. We clone the individuals and we assign them in order that the marginals across these variables that we select match correctly. And this is the outcome. The outcome is what is called a synthetic population. The synthetic population, we have a representation of all the working people in Monterrey, 2.7 million, with these variables that we use to do the cloning and matching procedure, and their income and the census tract where they live. So through this procedure, we are able to reproduce, to generate a synthetic population, and from the synthetic population, we wrangle the income data in such a way that we recreate the same categories as reported in a US census, for instance. And in that way, we're able to make use of all these indexes that we find in the literature of segregation to compute segregation in Mexico. So we performed this analysis for 5 Mexican cities. We have like a forthcoming paper on this. We're about to send it to the journal. This is how it looks like. This is median income by census tract. We aggregate the income from the synthetic population and get this map out of it. Some examples of how it works. These are 2 very, very segregated areas on the city. You can see the contrast, some images. This is another example. And in the website, in the urban information system, we have here alto rodeado de bajo, bajo rodeado de alto. Alto rodeado de bajo is alto ingreso, high income surrounded by low income. Oh, I apologize in advance because we're still working in making the websites more friendly with mobile devices. We're still working on that. So if you are accessing it from a mobile device, I don't know how it will look like. We're still working on that. Actually, that's our main task for this coming month. But the website should scale fine if you're in a desktop or laptop, or perhaps even in a tablet. So these are the 5 top % zones in the segregation index that show high income level surrounded by low income level. And this is the opposite. This other map is the zones with low income surrounded by high income households. And we're working now in getting some pictures, in making more interactive this map in such a way that you get not only the population distribution by quintile, but clicking on it and displaying an image on how this part of the city looks like. And we want to do it that way to have like a very visual tool in such a way that try to create conscience, or try to visualize this problem of segregation that we have in the city, and that is very common to the Mexican cities. And we all know about the dire consequences of growing in a highly segregated area. So it's a second thing that we have worked on. Finally, urban form. We've been working a lot on trying to characterize the different areas in the city. Let me show you some what we work. Okay. Well, here you can see the growth of population in the different years. I didn't show you this before, but you find it in the section of context. Then this is the location of jobs. So you can see how the city in 2010 was very, very monocentric. In 2020, we can see some disconcentration of jobs in the central area, but still the city is highly monocentric, right? It's polycentric, but still you have like this sort of forma compuesta that it's polycentric, but the center is still dominant in the density of jobs. And here we come to, this is a representation that we have in the one day in the life of Monterrey, based on the origin destination survey from 2019. So we have activity, motivo de viaje. What's the motivo de viaje, and how it starts changing over the space by day. Sorry, by hour. So you can see, like in the morning, you have like all these work-related trips and also schooling, and then how the patterns start changing as the time goes on. The goal of this visualization is to show, okay, we say that the city is polycentric. We say that the people has migrated to the suburbs, but how it looks like in flux, not fixed. How it looks like through the millions of people traveling every day from their housing units to their work location or school location. So we've done the same thing, but using the census data. So you can see the number of trips from one municipality to another. So this is kind of transportation related. And finally, we have here this thing that I was interested in showing you, urban form. These are the 34 most relevant centralities that concentrate 53% of the jobs in the city. The colors indicate the type of centrality, and the type of centrality is related to the combination, the diversity of different type of activities that they house. For instance, in this red, you can see here, and you can see the distribution that we have of different type of jobs. Policymakers, when we show them this visualization, are very interested, because I mean, we all say we need to densify the city, but where? We need more mixed uses in the city, but where? And what we do here is like a data-driven approximation to try to propose a systematic way based on public data on how to come up with a selection of these spaces, how to come up with a proposal of which are the most important subcenters of activity in a city. You can say it more specific. More specific means with at a finer scale. Here, instead of having 34 different subcenters of activity, we have about 400 different spaces. Each one, also the color code indicates like the type of subcenter, and you can see the different combination of jobs and activities that we have by subcenters, right? Some of them focus on industry, others focus on financial services and other services. And also this has raised a lot of attention from public authorities, in order that we propose again a systematic way to look at kind of urban cores, different areas that are susceptible of densifying and encouraging mixed land uses in the city. And finally, so let me come up with how we've done this. El DNUE, maybe some of you have worked already with the DNUE. This is el Director Estadístico Nacional de Unidades Económicas. These are points that show the location of any type of commercial establishment or industry in Mexico. And we used a very popular algorithm these days clustering algorithm for a space called DBScan. We use a variation of the algorithm called HDBScan, that is hierarchical DBScan. And we use this method to delineate these high concentrations of points. And I mean, we do some filtration of the different codes and reaccommodating. And from there are two parameters that you need to define in the HDBScan, which is the sensitivity, which is the radius that you start looking for each point to see which other neighboring points are around. If you change that parameter, then you get different results, of course. With some parameters, if you wanted to make it less sensitive to noise and other points, you pick a wider radius and you come up with larger areas, right? If you select a very strict parameter for the radius, then you end up with smaller circles and smaller areas as well, which is the version that I showed you with the 400 and so polygons. So we come up with these two things that we call the coarse distribution and the fine distribution. The coarse distribution are the 34 different subcenters, and the other one is the 400 and so subcenters. In the beginning, when we were doing this, we were wondering, so which is the right one, the 34 or the 400 or something in between? It's hard to say. And that's a problem with all this type of data and data science techniques that we apply for the city are very sensitive to the parameter selection. But we said, okay, let's end up with two. The two are important. One, it's informative of the largest areas and can be interesting to do some planning and transportation, while the other one, if you are more interested in scale of neighborhoods, then the fine distribution is better and fits better. After we use a typical clustering algorithm like k-means or Madoid's clustering to group them by the combination, by the diversity of employments in the different categories of industry type. And that's the distribution there. What's the thing you see there? Also, we have a forthcoming paper out of this, but this is how our 34 areas for Monterrey looks like. And finally, this is the last thing that I have. Let's see if I'm in time. Okay. Social housing. When we start working on segregation and sprawl, it was kind of inevitable that we ended working on Infonavit social housing. All this residential sprawl that we see in the outskirts of the city is very, very related to this pattern of consumption of social housing that became very popular in Mexico after the year of 2000. Actually, Pablo is one of the experts on this topic and has studied in Mexico and has some papers on it. We have an agreement with Infonavit, and they share the data with us, and we start exploring the data. The data was very complicated to exploit because there were many inconsistencies in the data collection. We spent like 1 year only cleaning the data. And in the end, we ended using a combination of the census data with the Infonavit data to come up with a model. What we found is 10% of social housing is abandoned. This is a huge number. And we try to analyze what's going on. The interesting thing in our project is that our unit of analysis is not the housing unit, but we move it to be the housing project. So we aggregated some of the data in order that our unit of analysis are the polygons that enclose the fraccionamientos of the housing projects of Infonavit. And we combine it with census data and data from crime as well. For instance, these are the projects. This was a huge task done basically by hand by 2 of our research assistants to combine the data from credits. We got the credits from Infonavit, and they have latitude and longitude of where the credit is located. The problem is like about half of the data didn't report latitude and longitudes. So we use the Google Maps API to geocode the missing data. Kind of did it, but got some errors. In the end, it was to done part by hand, not the geocoding, but just to drawing the polygons that enclose the credits. So this is our approach that we followed in order to define our unit of analysis, which are these housing projects in Infonavit. You are working on a simple model, well as a linear regression. Our dependent variable is housing vacancy. Housing vacancy comes from the census. So what we've done is we've got these polygons from the credits of Infonavit, and we use the credits, and we use the polygons to aggregate the data from the credits and also to aggregate the data from the census. And we combine the two sources of data and fit it this model, where our unit of analysis are these small units we have here. We spent many months in this model that just never ends. We have a variation that is a Bayesian linear model of this, but we're now still working on the WLS. When we have like a final version, we'll move to the Bayesian version of it. But what we have here, it's in this diagram, we have the estimates. The estimates are standardized so that they truly reflect the same scale for the magnitude of the coefficients. And you can see the length of the line are the standard errors. And here we have if this line showing if the coefficient, the estimate is positive, either positive or negative. First, in these first variables, enter from Apodaca to Santa Catarina, it's just controls of where the project is located in which one of the municipalities. You can see some of them are not statistically significant, except one that is very strong, very positive, meaning that you have like more housing vacancies, General Suazua. General Suazua, Guadalupe General Suazua is a very emblematic municipality because this is where we took, let me show you, let me go back to this picture. This picture that you see here, this huge development is one of the more iconic, the most iconic housing developments in Monterrey. No, not in Monterrey, actually, it's in General Suazua. It's a municipality that is 40 kilometers from the central part of Monterrey. So it's kind of far away. You have like 20,000 people living here. It's like a small city. See the surroundings of the area. You have nothing. It's just Real de Palmas and that's it. This is the type of housing abandonment here. Infonavit now has a project of rescuing some of these abandoned houses and putting them back to the market. It's a very interesting place to visit, Real de Palmas. To me, it's fascinating how if you get from the main entrance and you go through the primary street. So the primary street used to be only like residential housing, but all of the housing units in that corridor have been reconverted to commercial uses, because just a lot of people that you have there and passing cross by through the project. So this is you can see General Suazua is basically Real de Palmas, the development that I show you. Interesting things. We have been exploring and testing a lot household density. We are very interested in the size of the project. If there's some, we are interested in trying to find out if there is some effects of the size and the scale of the development in the housing vacancy. If either largest developments as General Suazua, if that has an impact as compared to a small development of just 50 units. I don't have an answer yet. I mean, you can see here this estimate is positive, but when we change some definition of the variables and pull in, pull out some other variables, the coefficient might change. So we don't have like a conclusive thought about this. We test different variables related to crime. We test the subcenters of activity that I show you in these 34 different subcenters. We test both the 34 subcenters and the 400 subcenters definition and compute the distances that we have there. These are these variables that we have here: subcenter, financial and retail trade, subcenter, industry and retail trade. So we test all kind of combination of those subcenters. Here we have like a positive effect, right? More distance to this type of subcenters implies larger housing vacancy and abandonment. So this is work in progress. We don't have like a final version of the model. We're still working on it. But what we have for the website are just some basic findings. If I move to Problematica, this is the second last visualization to try to make it more visual and engage the public. We have just a visualization of the housing units, where they are from 1990 to 2020. So you are going to start seeing, after the year of 2000, all the sprouting development, all the explosion, I would say not sprouting, all the explosion of housing that it's going to start happening here in Garcia and Suazua and Apodaca. So the prices are scaled by the inflation index and the prices index. So those are currently reflected in 2019 prices. Some preliminary findings from the results that we put here, but most likely this is going to change after we have a final version. So what's next to our project? Two things are next. On the first hand, we are working with the FENSA Foundation and Distrito Tech. That is the area of urban renewal for Monterrey, incorporated to Tec de Monterrey. So we're working with them to conduct a number of workshops with public authorities and citizens. We're going to focus first in public authorities, representatives of the representatives of the 18 municipalities, hopefully the mayors, if not directores de plan, and if not directores de desarrollo urbano. It's not just about showing them the platform and how to use it. The goal of the workshops is to start a discussion about the future of the city. In the section of the website, you see there's a third section in the menu called dilemmas, and it's empty now. The goal is to have hold these workshops that are going to start in June, end of May and June, and to build that section of dilemmas together with the authorities and representatives of the different municipalities. Then we'll have a second round of promotion and discussion with citizens and public and civic organizations related to urban development and climate change that are interested in the project. And let's see where that takes us. The goal is that we can start perhaps in 1, 2, 3 years, some sort of participatory process with citizens and universities involved in trying to come up with what's the vision of the city that we want for Monterrey. And that's one goal. On the analytics part, many of these analyses that you've seen on segregation, urban form, computing the growth of the urbanized area, we're focusing now on scenarios of future. I don't know if Gonzalo is here, but Gonzalo is working in a sleuth version for Monterrey to predict urban growth. So our goal is to, by the end of the next year, have an atlas of 100 cities in Mexico. To try to, we're working systematizing all these methodologies that we have developed. We have like a kind of toolkit now, and to use it to come up with that atlas of urban expansion, but thinking more in a national level and not only in Monterrey. And that's our work, and those are the plans for the future.
Thank you so much. Oh man, so much good stuff there. We'll have some time, I guess, for Q&A. I have like 17 questions here, but I guess I should let members of the attending public ask questions first. I don't know if you want to throw questions in the chat. Then Roberto can look at those and answer. Maybe I'll just read you all my questions, and then you don't have to answer, and you can answer one if you want, right? Just in case people are interested. So I think all of this work is excellent, and I'm very excited that, I'm very excited that you're doing it. I think you're bringing a level of sophistication to these topics that hasn't really been done before. And so, like I said earlier, like some of my calculations on expansion just using a HEB, I think are incorrect once you have the satellite imagery to be able to map the urban footprint more accurately. So that's really interesting. I think that the way to bring this to the public and to use this information to foment participation in the planning process and setting a vision for the city is an extremely important challenge that I don't think any country in the world has really solved, but I think everybody should be trying to do that, right? So like in the US, we're very critical of, we have this planning process in California that's happening right now. And the way that technical information is communicated to the public is extremely poor, and people don't really understand what's at stake and what's on the table. The costs of different decisions in the long term are often not there. I mean, this point about the long-term costs of building a bunch of tertiary roads, I think is extremely important, but the political incentives are bad, but also the way people understand the future is complicated. So I think all the work you can do on that, the better, especially if you can get, I was thinking actually, like, I don't know, is it INAI, no, it's the Federalism Institute of the federal government that's focused on federalism, or Ciudad, who really should be sponsoring a competition for best practices about how to communicate this kind of information to the public and bring in the public in the planning process. I don't know if you know, there's a group in Juarez, in Ciudad Juarez, I forgot what they're called. It's like una asociación cívica that has been involved with the planning process for a long time that seem really good. So that might be someone to reach out to, but it seems like, coordinating efforts across cities on these kind of public engagement stuff is really important. So maybe I'll just read you all my other questions, and then you can answer any of them or none of them. It's up to you. So first one was, so this phenomenon of we call it the donutification of density increasing at the edge and dropping in the center of the city is observed in most cities in Mexico. And so obviously in my work, I focused on the role of Infonavit, and you mentioned how the financing pulls housing to the edge, but I wonder if there's anything particular in Monterrey, like in Guadalajara, I know there's issues with vacancy in the city center because of inherited properties and problems with legal documents. You inherit your parents' house, you've already moved, the testimonio is not there, and so you leave it empty. But I was thinking maybe also just the industrial land, and actually the industry, in terms of the decreasing density overall, I wonder what role big naves industriales play in that, right? Because in 1990, you had very few car factories, and now you have very many car factories. And in terms of urbanized land per person, they're very low, right? And so you could have seen, housing unit, like people per housing unit and the size of housing units remain constant. But if you add a bunch of big factories, then the overall population density per urbanized area is going to decrease. So that might be something. I mean, I think explaining the details of, okay, so we see this phenomenon, it's a problem for public finance, it's a problem for commuting, for the environment, for social life. It causes all these problems, but like the details of what it is, other than just, I mean, obviously the Infonavit practices have been bad for it, but kind of the other things that the city could change is useful to look into. The growth, the expansion is bad kind of idea, I think is a really interesting one, because on the one hand, like, you know, sprawl has all these costs, but historically, I think a lot of urban planners in Mexico and Latin America and everywhere have like urban growth is bad kind of mentality, and like blaming, you know, talking about chaotic expansion as a problem, right? And I don't think urban growth is bad. There's certain kinds of urban growth that are better than others, and we should try to make it happen in a way that is environmentally sustainable and et cetera. But, you know, the population is growing, and so cities should grow, and, you know, people can move to the city and make their lives better, and we shouldn't, you know, we don't want to prevent people from being able to move to economically productive cities just because of some problems that arise in the way it's happening, right? And so that's something that I think thinking about is interesting. Similarly, like with the developer, like blaming developers, you know, so private developers are doing the Infonavit housing, and is it their fault? They're so greedy. And like, sure, but you mentioned how San Nicolas de los Garza has this height limit that prevents tall buildings from being constructed. And so in California, I'm sure it will be the same thing if you tried to change that height limit to allow housing to be built in San Nicolas de los Garza. Then people are going to say, oh, the developers building these tall buildings are so evil and greedy and making all this money, right? So I think developers are, you know, people making money like any other entrepreneur. And so it's the structure of policies that they're responding to and demands. You know, if they're building housing that people want because people are paying for it, then that's presumably good because people are getting housing that they want, right? And so I think, you know, just something to think about. Yeah, I have 10 more questions, but maybe I'll just stop there. I guess, yeah, those are maybe the more, the other ones are kind of, oh, the last one I'll mention is, I think what's super interesting about the topic of segregation is you show these pictures, which is a very common way to start the topic, is like, here's a picture of a mansion with a swimming pool and it's next to like the shack, and like, is that segregation? But actually, in my perspective, that's great. Like in the United States, the problem of segregation is that all the mansions are in this side of the town where the weather's nice and there's a beach, and all the low-income housing is over here near the factories and the oil refinery that's polluted, right? So in a world where you have a very, very rich person living next to a poor person, I think that's actually great because they're having the same public services, I mean, similar public services, and they're maybe interacting with one another. So I think that's actually not segregation. That's, to me, integration. And I think it's the larger scale of separation between incomes that's the bigger problem, right? Which happens in Monterrey also, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's related to the dimensions, this whole paper, the dimensions of segregation, right? The exposure and evenness. So the indexes try to grasp some elements either of evenness of exposure, but it's hard to get both, right? In the example that you said, that's, you don't get exposure, but you get some sort of evenness because the population is split into two, right? In the picture that I showed, you get some exposure, but you don't get evenness. Yeah. Right. Yeah, but it's interesting. Yeah, it's always interesting. Now, about your other comments and questions is regarding what's happening in the central part of Monterrey. Yes, I mean, of course, there's always these problems. I don't know what's the word in English, but cuando tienen testamento, yes.
Yeah, the will. Yeah,
the will, and mueren intestadas, propiedades intestadas. So that's a huge problem. In Monterrey, what has happened is a few administrations back, the Implan declared that TOD was a priority and said free FAS. What's the acronym in English? I forgot. Coeficiente único de suelo. De uso de suelo. FAR, the FAR. Free FAR in the central area. And what's been happening is that there's a lot of speculation with the lands in the central area. So you can start seeing these projects with 40-floor buildings, very huge, very large, but other parts of the central area that are not being developed because land is held in order to speculate with the free FAR that you have access now.
Right.
So it was not the right implementation. Perhaps some sort of approximation by like in the Brazilian cities, the CEPACs or like that would be more useful.
Selling the
right?
FAR.
Selling the FAR, yeah.
Well, or
okay.
Or if they instituted a good land value tax or a property tax that made holding costly, then people would be speculating that. But yeah.
And how the density is regulated as well. Density is very restrictive in the central municipalities. In San Pedro, in Monterrey, in San Nicolas. What we've seen now happening in municipalities like San Nicolas and Guadalupe, neighbors are always neighbors are reluctant to increase densities, as you said. In Los Angeles, the same happens in Monterrey. The public administrations in the new plans have allowed some sort of densification, increasing the FAR, but along corridors, just corridors.
Yeah.
They define some corridors of intervention where they try to encourage mixed use and increase the FAR, and that's it. That's the farthest we've been able to get.
It's very, very United States.
Yes, and Monterrey also is very interesting in the location of jobs, because we've seen in the 3D maps that yes, the city is kind of monocentric, but because the largest weight in employment is related to retail and food. So food and retail, you find the largest weights and the largest presence in the central area of Monterrey. But what is interesting about Monterrey, and I haven't seen it in other cities, is the spread of industrial jobs. You don't have only one industrial park, or all industrial parks are not in Apodaca, for instance. You have like a spread of industrial and manufacturing facilities well spread across it could be like from the central north part of the city, from east to west, you find like a good number of industrial jobs and small clusters as well distributed.
Right.
And that has an impact in access to jobs for social housing.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
We struck with the social housing units, for instance. One of my students work in this project of recuperating housing units in Real de Palmas by Infonavit. They hired one of the, I don't know if you know them, but one of the largest consultancies in Mexico in these topics. They hired these guys, came to Monterrey, done the analysis about housing abandonment in Real de Palmas. And one of the findings that was striking to me is the large demand for these units. So, for instance, they found, asking to realtors, that at this time, if you announce a unit in Real de Palmas, an offer for sale, it lasts about 2 weeks in the market.
Oh wow!
It's just gone very fast, very quickly.
Demand has caught up,
yes,
I guess.
Demand goes, yes.
Interesting.
And of course, we still haven't found the right way, or maybe we're not posing the right question, but to try to come up with some intuition of what's the impact of scale on housing. We're interested in that, and we haven't been able yet to get a good answer on that.
But that's a really impressive data set you've created. And Jorge asked a question congratulating you on the platform and asking how easy it would be to replicate for other cities, and also could it all at all be connected to the Situ that Ceratu just launched recently?
Yes. I think we have the know-how now. Most of the maps are developed in DEC, which is this platform that was developed by Uber engineers. and it's more friendly with large data sets than Mapbox, for instance. We have some combination of Mapbox and like, so it's feasible. What we're gonna try to do with the 100 cities is to do it at the national level, trying to replicate some of the analysis and the visualizations, but without getting into the details as we do to Monterrey with Monterrey. But still it's challenging. I mean,
so the width of streets, probably not.
This version of the platform, I have six programmers, are undergrad students from computer science, and we've spent already like 6 months at least working on this version of the platform, and we every week encounter new things. So now the thing is that we need to make it more friendly with mobile devices, and it's like a never-end task. So it's hard to
well,
it's like but once you get it,
it's like you're launching a company or something. I mean, it's such an impressive amount of work to try to do the. I mean, usually academics are just do the research and write a paper, not produce the interface and you know, have meetings with public officials and all this stuff. But I think it's fantastic work. So I guess we should probably wrap there to let people get back to their day. But Roberto, thank you so much for your presentation. It was fantastic. And I'll email you all my other questions because it might be boring to everyone else.
No,
thanks
everyone
for joining,
for having me.
Yeah, and see you next week if other people want to join to talk with Alejandro Trejo.
Okay. Bye bye.
Gracias. Saludos, Roberto.
Saludos, Iván. Gracias.